This week on the Read Well podcast, we're going to be talking about memoirs and why they will change the way you experience reading books. Not only that, they'll change how you experience living your own life. Now, if you've never read a memoir, then you are in for a treat. If you have, I'm going to share with you several reasons as to how you can benefit from them, how you can read them to get more out of them, and I'm also going to give you a book recommendation of my, up to this point at least, my most favorite memoir to date. Let's get into it. Welcome to this week's episode of the Read Well podcast. My name is Eddie Hood, and I'm your host, where I believe it's more important to read well than to be well read. So grab your favorite book, open up your notes, and let's get ready to learn something fascinating. Hey friends, welcome back to the Read Well podcast. This is Eddie Hood, and I'm so excited to be here with you this week. Well, I'm always excited to be here. We're talking about books. What's not to be excited about? I wanted to share with you, or at least thank each of you for taking time to go out of your way and make time on the Apple Podcasts app to leave me a rating and a review. We're actually up to 55 ratings now, and that took us from 4.7 stars to 4.8 stars. And I just can't thank you enough. I wanted to read two of them to you really quick from this week. We got one from Rev Running. This person said, "What a wonderful podcast this is. It opens up worlds of thought and imagination, a breath of fresh air." There is a second review here from June 221991, which says, "I like the Read Well podcast a lot. I like Eddie's personality. He seems like a kind and well thought out person. Thank you." It also says, "What I like about the podcast is that it shares my love for reading. There are different topics such as why I read poetry, reading Russian literature, and so on. I'm mildly interested in reading these two genres, but Eddie's podcast gave me some tips and inspiration to try them." That's really what this is all about, right? We are learning to become better readers, appreciate the books in our lives, and get more out of them. And you might love poetry, you might love Russian literature, who knows? But the goal here is to try these genres out, to learn more about them and see if they can enrich your life. And that's going to be the perfect segue in today's topic, which is memoirs. Now, I don't know if reading memoirs is something that you are more interested in as you get older in life. I think for me, that's the case. I never had any interest in reading these things when I was younger. I wanted to read about pirates and, random stuff. But as I've gotten older and I've realized that I know less and less about life, I think I turn to other humans to see how they're living and to see if they have any answers for me. Memoirs are a really beautiful way to do that because people really bear their soul on paper, and it is fascinating to see what other people's lives are like. It's a little voyeuristic, to be honest. I mean, you're getting into a book that's a couple hundred pages long, and you are looking at somebody's most sensitive and painful and beautiful experiences, and it is just a privilege to read a memoir, assuming it's written well. Now, my hope for this episode is I want to walk you through really quickly sort of the difference between a memoir and an autobiography, because there are some differences. I would also like to give you some ideas on how you can get more out of reading memoirs and maybe why you should try one out, right? If you've never read a memoir, I'd like you to just try one and see what you think. So let's start there. What is the difference between a memoir and an autobiography? Well, both are written by the person themselves, right? So if I were to write these, I would be writing about my own personal life. An autobiography is more a chronological event or a listing of events in my life from the moment I was born to my current day of living and what I've been through. And it really is a look at all of the good, all of the bad, the things I've learned, and so on. A memoir is usually a little more focused. It's not all this stuff. It's not everything that's happened to you, but instead usually focuses on a specific time in your life or a theme of your life. And that's what I'm interested in here, especially with the book recommendation I'm going to give you today. You're going to love this recommendation, by the way, if you stick around for the whole show. But this recommendation is based on a theme, and it follows the course of this woman's life, but a very specific and, quite honestly, brutally painful and scary part of her life, and just how courageous she is and continues to be. I think that's one of the reasons why I love memoirs so much, because I sit at my desk all day and I look at a computer screen. I do accounting by day. That's my day job. And I'm not out in the world doing hard, difficult, or challenging things. I mean, I have a really cushy life, everybody. I know that. I'm grateful for that. I try not to take that for granted. And memoirs help me do that. When I read these stories of people battling cancer or surviving oppression or what have you. I'm like shocked that people have to live this way, and just so grateful for what I have, and hopefully gain a little more empathy as to why it's important to care and to try to help others out. Well, let's talk really quickly about some benefits to reading these things. Why should you read a memoir? No matter where you're at in life, I think a lot of us feel like we're too busy to do anything related to books. That's the whole point of this podcast, is a weekly reminder to help you slow down and to open a book and to read something and truly appreciate it. And hold nothing back here, right? Again, we talk about poetry and Russian literature and today memoirs. But what do you really gain if you open up a memoir? Well, I got a couple ideas here. The first is that you're going to gain some insight just into personal experience itself, right? You are going to be exposed to ways of living that you didn't know existed. You're going to be educated on types of food and culture and family units. I'm shocked at how different cultures sort of treat the family unit. I find it fascinating. How do parents relate with their children in one culture compared to the other? What's it like growing up in a specific country compared to my own? I think it's just eye-opening, and it tells me that we have very different ideologies around the world, and some of them are inspiring and some of them are horrific, to be quite honest. The second benefit really from having some memoirs to turn to is that we get to actually learn some life lessons. I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but to sit and talk to somebody for an hour who has something intelligent to say is just such a great return on your investment, because that person probably put years of effort, living, and education into having that insight, and now they're simply sharing it with you. I gave a post on Facebook a few days ago, in fact I wrote it on my blog, about the idea that for just $16 you can buy Fyodor Dostoevsky's book, The Idiot. Now that book is packed full of psychology and philosophy and social dynamics and just so many different things. And for just $16, you get Dostoevsky's brain. You get all of his insight, just his phenomenal questions about life, these paradoxes. And I cannot think of a better way to educate yourself than go down to the bookstore and spend, $9, $16 on a book, and walk away with years and years of that person's life and, education. This has always been very impactful for me because I grew up sort of without a father figure a little bit. My parents got divorced when I was younger. My mother was always there for me, still is. If you're listening to this, I love you, Mom. But, my dad, I would go to his house every other weekend as I grew up. I didn't have that constant father figure, and so I didn't always have access to learning things like how to fix a car or how to shave or how to plan a date when you're going to take a girl out, those kinds of things that you need to learn from somebody. And so there are many things in life that I have had to learn through books. And I think memoirs teach us a specific set of skills, because you can get a book on shaving and a book on fly fishing and a book on how to do magic tricks, but it is challenging. Well, it's not challenging. It's a whole different thing to get a book on how to be resilient, how to be courageous, how to face your complete mortal fear. And this is often what memoirs do. People will write these stories about something that is just unworldly. And as you read it, it gives you strength for whatever you're going through in your own personal life. The next idea I had here, I've been using this idea of gaining empathy. I just got done listening to a podcast by Sam Harris. He is a neuroscientist and a philosopher and an author, just an incredible person. But he interviewed a gentleman about the difference between empathy and compassion. Now, when you read a memoir, you actually gain some empathy and some compassion, right? And I think that there is a very different aspect to those two words. With empathy, you are feeling the other person's pain. Not only are you caring about them, but you're feeling their pain in the best way possible. Now, there are some arguments for this and some arguments against this. If you experience too much empathy, you could ultimately do damage to your own life. I don't know if you've ever had that, where you have been with people who are simply, I like to call them emotional vampires. They latch on to you and they suck the blood out of your life. They make you just sad and depressed and heavy and all of that stuff. So empathy in certain instances can actually be a bad thing, I think. Compassion is a similar word, but here it is, I'm loving a person, but I'm not necessarily feeling your pain. I'm simply here to help you with your pain. I think there's a reason or a call for both of those at different times. But when you're reading a memoir, you are definitely growing in both empathy and compassion because you are learning about a difficult challenge somebody's going through, or something interesting or fascinating or complex or terrifying. And you almost by default have to ask yourself, oh my gosh, how would I deal with this? How would I live this way if I had this thing in my life? These memoirs make you feel more human. If you read Lord of the Rings or Stephen King or whatever, you're on the edge of your seat and you're excited, but they don't necessarily make you feel more human. You're just entertained. If you read nonfiction, you don't necessarily feel more human. You just feel more educated. A memoir has the unique ability to sort of grab you by your shoulders, shake you, and say, hello, dear human, you're still alive. What are you doing with your life? So that leads me into the next sort of benefit to reading memoirs, and I think it is the concept of self-reflection. When you read these things, you're going to walk away each day with just a different mindset, especially with the book recommendation I'm going to give you today. As you read this book, if you choose to do so, it will change the way you see yourself, your family, your belief systems and ideologies, how you raise your kids, how you deal with fear and panic and violence and all of this stuff, right? It is going to shake you up in a very good way and help you sort of analyze how you're doing and how you want to live life. I hope I'm building this up, the book recommendation that's coming. I really want you to check this book out. I haven't read a book this powerful in quite a while, and I think it deserves the attention that I'm trying to give it because I want as many people as possible to hear this woman's story because these are the kinds of stories that need to be heard. Now, the last benefit of reading memoirs simply is just inspiration and motivation. Again, you may likely be going through something very hard in your life. Perhaps you've lost your job. Perhaps you're fighting with your spouse. Maybe you are struggling with a disease of some kind. And it is challenging to be misunderstood. Very few people understand what it's like to be you in your situation. And even those that don't fully get it. That's not to say that a memoir is going to fill that gap in your life, but it is nice to be able to go out and selectively pick memoirs where people have gone through something similar, and it just gives you a little fire to sort of build on, just a little courage, some sort of cliff to hang on to so that you don't just give up. I'd like to take just a second to hit pause on this show to tell you about the readwellpodcast.com. If you go there, you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter on reading deeply. Simply go to thereadwellpodcast.com, enter your email, and I'll send you a message every Wednesday at 9 a.m. on how to become a deep and thoughtful reader. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. Well, let's take a second here and talk about some ideas on how to get the most out of memoirs. I mean, this is a book that needs to be read a little differently. With fiction, I often like to read with sort of thematic questions in mind. Again, we're reading The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky in my book club, and we're approaching that book with major questions of how wealth affects relationships, how society plays a role in our lives, how media influences us, how people lie and cheat and steal with each other, those kinds of things, right? Minor things. But if you're reading nonfiction, we approach those kinds of books differently. Often I have my note-taking system next to me, and I am really working through those books that I care about in order to glean the most from them. We read poetry differently than we do biographies and so on. So how do you approach a memoir? Well, here's a couple ideas for you. First of all, pick a memoir that resonates with you. There are simply too many books in this world to read, and you don't have time to read them all. So you really do need to be selective here and pick the book or the story that aligns with your own personal interests or challenges. Again, if you're going through cancer, for example, it would be a great idea to pick up a memoir on somebody who fought and battled cancer, who can put your struggle into words. It wouldn't make as much sense to read a book or a memoir, for example, of an entrepreneur who launched a $40 billion business. That's not going to really resonate with you in this point in your life. Now, the second thing to consider is to take some notes while you're reading a memoir. Now, why would you take notes on a memoir? Again, you are looking for ways to self-reflect and gain some clarity in your own personal life. So you might not want to fully dive into your note-taking system here, your online digital brain, or whatever you're going to call it. Perhaps you just have a simple, beautiful notebook that you're going to keep with you to jot down some ideas or some questions. You might point out in that notebook how this person is handling the same challenges you have, the questions that they have battled with, and their answers to those questions. You might want to write down any sort of inspirational quotes that give you strength and so on, right? So definitely have a note-taking system, but keep it simple. A memoir is not something that you need to be memorizing or reciting or using for work down the road. This is something to sort of fill up your own personal well. One thing you can always do to get more out of a book is to read and discuss it with other people. This is why I love book clubs. I honestly cannot state the value of a book club. It is just something you have to experience. Now, again, you need to have a membership in a book club that is reading the kinds of works that you need or want to read. So with my book club, for example, the Read Well Book Club, we're very focused on philosophical works and works that have some psychology to them, anything that's going to give us insight into the human experience. So you might want to look for a book club that is supporting the concept of memoirs, especially the memoir you want to read. And if your book club is open to it, feel free to suggest that book to the moderator and ask if we can add it to the reading list. It's always a good idea to try and do that, because if you can read this book with other people, they're going to bring their own insight and personalities to it that will give you new ideas that you wouldn't have caught on your own. It's so weird to me. Reading a book with another human being somehow just makes that book more expansive, more interesting, more dynamic. I think I like to think that I understand what's going on in a book, that it makes sense to me, but it never fails. Every time I talk with people in my book club, they just layer on all of these insights and thoughts that just make everything so much better. The next idea on getting the most out of a memoir is this concept of reflection. I always talk about the philosopher Nietzsche, and he used a term called exegesis, which is when you read something to take it away and perhaps go for a walk, and you want to chew on that word. You want to ruminate on it. You want to ask questions and look at it from different angles and really consider what it means. And the interesting thing here is that object or this concept that you just read could mean something very different to you now than it will in a year or two when you've gone through different experiences. So it's really important not to just read the words on the page, turn the page and keep going. You really need to hit pause on your reading and go for a walk and compare what's happening in the memoir to your own personal life. This next idea might be a little hard for some of us. In fact, it's probably hard for all of us, and that is to read a memoir with an open mind, because we are all bringing biases to the books that we read, and that is a problem. We suffer from so many personal biases that it can really distort the meaning of a book. And I'm trying to get better at this, to open up a text and ask myself as I read something, how does this relate to what I already believe in? And then I try to say, okay, well, what is the opposite meaning of this then? I don't know if I'm wording that very well, but simply try and read something with an open mind. And when you're reading a memoir, you're reading somebody's personal experiences and beliefs, and it might go against what you believe in, but you know what? You might learn something. Finally, the last lesson I'd like to give you in terms of reading memoirs is to read multiple memoirs. And there's a reason why here, because when you talk to one person in a group, for example, you're going to get that person's take on life, their insight, and their ideologies and their biases and so on. And it's really important that you don't walk away with that impression and that impression only. It's always valuable to talk to a couple different people and get different stories. And this reminds me of being a parent. If you've ever had kids, you know that there are always two sides to a story. If something gets broken in the house, one kid will say something happened and another kid will say another thing happened. Nobody wants to take the blame. It's amazing how many stories can come out of different people and different characteristics. So yes, read several memoirs, and I think what's going to happen there is you will get to meet several interesting people, and you're going to see life anew from all of these different perspectives. And I guarantee you this, if nothing else, you're going to walk away feeling a little more connected to the human race, to your own personal challenge, and the solution that you're going to need to engage with to get over this challenge that you have. if the memoir has occurred and they've written about it, they've likely gotten through it. And so you're going to find a path through your own challenges. Okay, let's get into this week's book recommendation, this thing I've been talking about for the entire show. I'm really excited about this one. I came across this through Sam Harris. I mentioned him earlier. He's somebody I definitely listen to quite a bit and look up to as a modern thinker and somebody who has a lot of interesting things to say. However, this book is not about him nor his background. He simply recommended it, and so I thought, that sounds curious, and I got into it and I fell in love. The book is called Unveiled: How the West Empowers Radical Muslims by Yasmine Mohammed. So her name is spelled Yasmine Mohammed. Now, Yasmine is an incredible woman, and now I would consider her to be one of my heroes. And I just think anybody who's been through what she has been through definitely deserves, but geez, I don't know, just she's an incredible person. So here's the concept of her story. She was raised in Canada, but she was raised in a Muslim family, and this book is about her experience in the Islamic religion and how it shaped her life and her experiences and so many of the things that she went through in order to become who she is. And here's why this is fascinating, because Yasmine is making the argument that the Islamic culture, this actual religion here, definitely has some aspects to it which, especially for young women, can be quite terrifying. And she goes into explicit detail about all of the things that occur wherein, if she doesn't comply with the religion in a specific way, equate to a punishment of death. And it's terrifying to see what she goes through, and also to hear it from her own voice and realize that there are millions of women around the world who are experiencing the same things. And she is doing such a wonderful job of empowering these women to sort of stand up for themselves and find their own voice. So to give you a sense of what this book is, I actually want to read the description to you from the back of the book, because it does a better job than I can of explaining what this is all about. So here we go. Since September 11, 2001, the Western world has been preoccupied with Islam and its role in terrorism. Yet public debate about the faith is polarized. One camp says the religion of peace, while the other camp claims that Muslims are terrorists. Canadian human rights activist Yasmine Mohammed believes both sides are dangerously wrong. In Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam, Yasmine speaks her truth as a woman born in the Western world, yet raised in a fundamentalist Islamic home. Despite being a first-generation Canadian, she never felt at home in the West. And even though she attended Islamic schools and wore the hijab since age 9, Yasmine never fit in with her Muslim family either. With one foot in each world, Yasmine is far enough removed from both to see them objectively, yet close enough to see them honestly. So here's what you're going to walk into with this: to see this poor girl be berated, beat, sexually abused. You're going to see her try to fight for her rights. You're going to see her just go through horrific experiences trying to escape her family as she's trying to just find her own freedom and live her life the way that she wants to live it, without being told every step of the way how and what to do. This message is particularly poignant to me because I recently left an organized religion of my own. I used to be Mormon, and I'm no longer a member of the Mormon Church, and gratefully so. And my story is nowhere near as compelling or dangerous as Yasmine's. But in some small way, I felt like my life was controlled, and I felt like on a religious level that there were these ideas being promoted about books that had been written thousands of years ago about this supernatural power, an angry person in the sky, that if I didn't do exactly what he told me to do, I would be punished. I wouldn't go to heaven. I would lose my kids. I would be unhappy. And what I learned from all of that was that this life didn't matter. I had to give up everything so that when I die, I would then be happy. And that is the crux of Yasmine's story. She was taught all throughout her life growing up that she must give everything to Allah and that she must obey and do all she's asked, or she will be beat, she will be punished, and she will be even murdered. And if she does everything to the exact law, then perhaps she will go to paradise. Her story is so captivating and moving because she proclaims, just like I do and just like many other people are doing these days, that these laws that were written thousands of years ago are still confining our lives today. They are still driving who we are, how our society works, and they are not at all written for modern society, and they are causing lots of heartache, lots of bloodshed. These women in these communities are being just devastated because of these religious beliefs, and she's speaking out against that, and I think that is a beautiful thing. Now, for her to do that, this is why I am so just impressed by her. Think about what it's like to be her, to not only take her hijab off, but to write a book about it and to share her story with the world and to encourage women to just stand up for themselves and face this sort of tyranny, this patriarchal tyranny, this misogyny that is just all around them. If she is caught, she could easily be killed. Her family could be killed and so on. But she sees such a need to get this message out that she is willing to try and do what is right to make this world a better place. I think people like that definitely need our attention. So let's give her some attention. Go check out her book, Unveiled, How the Western Empowers Radical Muslims. Okay, everybody, that's it for this week's episode of the Read Well podcast. I hope you got something out of this. Now, if nothing else, perhaps try reading a memoir. It might change your life. It might give you new insight into who you are and how you face your own personal challenges. I know for me, I've got challenges as a parent, as a business owner, somebody who's trying to manage my own personal health. These stories of real human living just inspire me to take each day and make it beautiful. Again, I want to thank each of you for going to Apple Podcasts and leaving me a review. That is just doing so much to help the podcast get some visibility, and it's encouraging me to continue on with this show. It's definitely puts wind in my sails when I see a new review come through that is making a difference for you in your journey and path to becoming a better reader. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for supporting me and being so kind with your words. And until next week, as always, remember to read slowly, take notes, and apply the ideas. I'll see you next time. If you'd like to take your reading to the next level, then head on over to thereadwellpodcast.com. There you'll find daily posts on how to read well. You'll also get access to all of my book notes and tools for becoming a better reader. And as always, don't forget to read slowly, take notes, and apply the ideas. Thank you for listening to the Read Well podcast.